A second chance at love, a love story forged through sacrifice and duty. Previous episodes are available in playlist, a link is given in the video description. Episode 3. Soon, the trio arrived in front of Roxanne. In Lucian's arms, Estella stared at the beautiful lady in front of her. A rare expression of joy appeared on her face. Roxanne wasn't sure how to react to being stared at by the father and daughter duo. Thankfully, the man in front of Lucian spoke first to break the silence. "Are you the doctor recommended by Dr. Galloway to treat old Mr. Queen?" Roxanne adjusted her expression and smiled. "Yes. My name's Roxanne Jarvis." "Dr. Jarvis." The man stretched his hand out. "I'm Jonathan Queen. This here is my sister, Frida Queen." When he finished, he turned to Lucian. "This is... well, we regard him as our elder brother. His last name is Farwell." Roxanne tried to nod calmly and greeted. "Mr. Queen, Ms. Queen, Mr. Farwell." The moment she finished speaking, Lucian's crisp and meaningful chuckle rang out. There was a mocking tone in the laughter. Roxanne lowered her head to hide the emotions in her eyes. Frida studied her briefly before furrowing her eyebrows. She questioned, "You're the one who said you can treat my grandpa's condition, right? You look about as young as us, though. I doubt you have been working as a doctor for long. Are you sure you can do it?" Her attitude mirrored the one the butler had earlier. However, since it came from the patient's family member, Roxanne didn't mind her doubt. Before she could explain, Jonathan smiled apologetically. "I'm sorry. My grandpa's condition has been getting quite serious. We've hired all sorts of famous doctors in and out of the country, yet none of them could do anything. Our sister is simply worried that our grandfather will suffer even further. After all, a lot of doctors had given us false hope. It has happened enough times that we can't help but be cautious. I hope you don't mind, Dr. Jarvis." He then shot a glare at Frida. "Dr. Jarvis is here to treat Grandpa. How can you be so rude toward her? Apologize to her right now." Frida unwillingly looked away and muttered in a small voice, "I'm sorry." Roxanne didn't mind that at all. When she heard the apology, she smiled. "It's fine. After all, you two are his family members. I understand that you have concerns. However, I assure you I'm capable. I may be young and, I might not look like a doctor with years of experience under my belt, but I've researched many complicated diseases abroad. My experience isn't as plenty as doctors who had been in the profession for decades, but I'm confident in my abilities." When she finished, she pulled out a document from her bag and handed it to Jonathan. "This contains my achievements over the years. You can take a look yourself before deciding if I'm qualified to treat old Mr. Queen." Jonathan didn't expect she would be that prepared. When he reprimanded Frida earlier, he himself didn't trust Roxanne that much either. However, after seeing how confident she appeared and spoke, it was enough to convince him that she was capable even without looking at her credentials. Still, his responsibility for taking care of Alfred and curiosity about Roxanne compelled him to grab the documents to take a look. Before he could touch the document, a chiseled hand suddenly reached out and snatched the document away. Everyone present was taken aback. As Roxanne stared at the big hand grabbing her credentials, she panicked. Ever since she saw Lucian, she had been trying to avoid looking at him at all. Since he had suddenly taken away her credentials, she had no choice but to focus on him. I wonder what he's trying to do. Lucian held the document and glanced at Roxanne before commenting, "A lot of people nowadays will fake their credentials to make themselves look better. Old Mr. Queen's condition is already in a critical stage, so you two mustn't let people like that fool you." As he spoke, he casually flipped through the credentials and read them extremely slowly. It looked as though he was really trying to discern if it was fake or not. All details about her life, including the school she went to and the place she was working at, was absorbed by his eyes. The life she had lived over the past years started to take form in his mind. As she said, her achievements during her time abroad were quite impressive. Each of those credentials was so excellent that it would make people widen their eyes. Roxanne stared anxiously at him reading through her credentials. She saw that the more Lucian read, the more obvious the hint of mockery at the corners of his lips. Since she had no idea what he was thinking, all she could do was wring her fingers tightly and hope for the best. After a long while, Lucian slowly closed the cover of her credentials. At that moment, her body tensed up. "This looks real enough." He coldly swept his gaze past her and suggested, "However, I think you better double-check her info on the internet, Jonathan. It's best to make sure if she really is who she claims to be. After all, these credentials could be bought." Roxanne couldn't hold back anymore. "He's messing with me on purpose and trying to make them doubt my medical skills." On a normal day, she might have been able to tolerate it. However, because this had to do with the research institute, she had to obtain the chance to treat Alfred. Thinking of this, she stared at him seriously and answered coldly, "Yes, those can be bought, but you can't buy medical skills. If I'm not capable, then you'll know when I treat old Mr. Queen, Mr. Farwell." Things were getting pretty tense between them. It was as though a conflict was brewing. Jonathan found the situation quite odd. Do they know each other? They have to, right? Why else would he say things like that to her? "Do you two know each other?" Frida asked. Roxanne didn't hesitate at all before denying it. "Nope. How can I possibly know someone as mighty as Mr. Farwell?" Then she turned to Jonathan. "I'm here to treat old Mr. Queen, Mr. Queen. If you don't mind, will you let me take a look at him?" She was trying to avoid interacting with Lucian directly. Her change of topic was so sudden that Jonathan's reaction couldn't catch up with it. Roxanne's expression turned even more serious. "I am a doctor, and I'm just here to understand old Mr. Queen's condition. Even if I can't treat him, he won't get hurt. Please let me take a look at him. If I can treat him, then he'll have a chance to survive. If not, I'll leave right away and won't disturb you any longer." Jonathan was somewhat moved by Roxanne's determination, but he still turned to see what Lucian thought. Lucian was merely staring at her coldly and silently. Upon seeing that, Jonathan nodded at her. "Then I'll take you to my grandfather. Please follow me." She secretly let out a sigh of relief and tried her best to ignore Lucian's gaze. He passed by his side as she followed Jonathan. Frida was still worried after seeing her brother bringing the young doctor upstairs, so she followed them too. The three of them soon vanished at the corner of the stairs. When Estella saw Roxanne leaving, she pulled her father's collar to gesture for him to follow the woman. Lucian looked away from the staircase and stared at the child in his arms. His lips twitched before he headed upstairs too. Roxanne almost had a heart attack when she saw him suddenly appearing as she arrived at Alfred's room. "We've arrived," Jonathan announced. She quickly forced herself to calm down and followed him into the room. Upon entering the room, a strong smell of medicine rushed into her nose. She swept a glance across the room and saw a big bed sitting in the middle of it. Standing next to the bed were a couple of people in white outfits. It would appear that they were the medical team specially prepared for Alfred. His room was likely a dedicated medical room to treat the old man. Just as the rumors suggested, the Queen family cared a lot about Alfred's condition. Jonathan brought her straight to Alfred's bed. "Dr. Jarvis, if you will." Roxanne lowered her head and examined the patient on the bed. Alfred looked pretty weak on the bed. He was so thin that he was almost just bones, and his cheeks were sunken. If he wasn't lying down in a medical room, people would have thought he was a corpse. The look in Roxanne's eyes turned stern as her eyebrows furrowed tightly. "His condition is as severe as Colby described." She examined him without delay. First, she held the old man's wrist to check his pulse. Jonathan was taken aback when he saw that. If she's doing that, it means she practices traditional medicine. It's hard to believe she's using such a simple diagnostic method on him. The Queen family had hired medical practitioners of all kinds to treat Alfred's condition, so he had personally seen different medical techniques being applied to Alfred. That was the reason he was shocked by Roxanne's action. It was a very simple technique to diagnose Alfred's condition. Still, he didn't say anything. She sat next to the bed, holding Alfred's wrist. Her eyes were lowered as she focused entirely on the activities of his pulse. The more she observed his pulse, the more she was shocked. She thought his condition was severe enough when Colby described it. However, Alfred's actual condition turned out to be even worse. During her diagnosis, she noticed Alfred's breathing was so weak that any breath could be his last. After a while, Roxanne let go of the old man's hand with a heavy expression and approached Jonathan. "What's the result, Dr. Jarvis? How's my grandpa's condition? Can you treat him?" Hope glimmered in Jonathan's eyes. However, Roxanne furrowed her eyebrows and questioned, "Why wasn't old Mr. Queen sent to the hospital, even though he's in such a critical condition? Why is he being kept inside the house even though he's on the verge of dying?" The expression on the Queen siblings' faces instantly changed. "What are you saying?" Frida glared at Roxanne furiously. "Can you treat him or not? If you can't, then just say so. Don't curse my grandpa like that." Roxanne stared at her coldly. "I'm already putting things very mildly. After the delay and not getting his treatment in time, your grandfather is suffering malfunctions in many of his organs. His immune system is rapidly deteriorating. Normally, cases like this require the patient's body to be taken care of in a timely, healthy manner. However, the medical team you hired didn't care about the patient's health condition and just pumped his body full of drugs. This isn't treating his condition, it's killing him even quicker." The leader of the medical team was pretty unhappy at the accusation. He approached them and justified his actions in front of Roxanne. If you don't understand the situation, then don't spit out nonsensical judgments, miss. Old Mr. Queen's condition was getting pretty serious. If we hadn't given him the medicine in time back then, he wouldn't have survived. Please don't question our professionalism. Besides, we're hired by Ms. Pearson. Why would we hurt him? Roxanne instantly caught the name of his employer. Ms. Pearson? Does he mean Aubrey? I can't believe she hired this medical team. Where did she find this team of buffoons? Not only do they suck, but they're also arrogantly confident. Heh, does he think I'll be afraid just because she's the one who hired them? Roxanne's expression was getting pretty cold, so she retorted, professionalism? Forgive me for being candid, but I cannot see a shred of professionalism in this team. If you have even the tiniest bit of professionalism, the patient's condition wouldn't have become this severe. The doctor was stumped. When he thought about how sick Alfred looked at that moment, his eyebrows furrowed tightly. No words came out of his mouth. When she saw how the doctor was getting lambasted, Frida's expression changed as she stepped forward. Since you're acting so high and mighty, does this mean you're certain you can cure my grandpa? If not, stop wasting time and talking nonsense here. Aubrey had introduced many good doctors over the years to help treat my grandfather. Lucian is doing the same as well. But now you're saying their years of hard work amounts to nothing. Roxanne furrowed her eyebrows and glanced at Lucian's emotionless face. She then looked away and replied resolutely, I'm simply speaking the truth. It's not my place to say if their hard work has gone to waste. I just think everyone should know about the truth. You. Frida didn't expect her to be that sharp-tongued. Seeing how a fight was about to erupt, Jonathan glared at his sister. Frida unwillingly shut up upon meeting his eyes. He spoke sincerely after reprimanding his sister. I apologize on my behalf for my sister. However, right now, I don't care about how the treatment was handled before. I just want to know if you are confident that you can treat my grandfather's condition. If you do, then please hurry. As you said, my grandpa's condition is so severe that we can't afford any delays anymore. Frida spat out sarcastically as well. Yeah, aren't you so good? Quickly treat our grandfather. Then. I want to see how capable you are. Roxanne ignored her attempt at provocation and returned to the bed. I'm going to treat him now. Please help me take off old Mr. Queen's clothing. When they heard that, they were shocked. They had met many famous doctors who attempted to treat Alfred, yet that was the first time they heard someone asking them to take off Alfred's clothes. Jonathan was the first to react as he asked cautiously, is it necessary? Roxanne glanced at him weirdly. I'm about to treat old Mr. Queen, and his shirt will prevent me from treating him more easily. Can someone help? Please do it quickly. Everyone in the room, including the medical team, exchanged looks with each other. They had no idea why it was necessary to take the patient's shirt off for the treatment. Jonathan hesitated before gritting his teeth and stepping forward. Seeing that her brother had relented, Frida was panicking. What kind of treatment is this? Why, before she could finish, she saw Roxanne pulling out a quaint wooden box from her medical kit. There was a scroll-like item inside. After she unrolled it, Hundreds of big and small silver needles could be seen arranged neatly inside. Frida was shocked by what she saw and swallowed her words. Roxanne focused on taking out the needles she needed before disinfecting them with alcohol. She didn't at all pay attention to what Frida was saying. In front of her, Jonathan was pulling Alfred toward himself with great difficulty. One of his hands was stabilizing the old man's body while the other was taking off the shirt. Since Alfred was completely unconscious at that moment, he wasn't going to cooperate. It made Jonathan's actions even more difficult. Lucian stared at Roxanne's actions as the look in his eyes darkened. When he saw how much Jonathan was struggling, he put Estella on the ground and ordered, "I'll be helping Jonathan out. Stay here and don't move, okay?" She nodded obediently as she watched her father walk through the crowd and stood next to the bed. He then silently helped Jonathan remove Alfred's shirt. "Thanks, Lucian." Jonathan stared at him gratefully. Lucian nodded silently. When Roxanne noticed Lucian was there, her eyelashes quivered, though she quickly returned to her calm self as she focused on the needles. Soon, Alfred's shirt was removed, and everyone was able to see how thin his body was. Roxanne had expected that. She asked the two men to hold the old man steadily. "Stabilize him. I'm going to start the treatment now." Jonathan nodded with a serious expression. Then she looked at Lucian, who didn't react at all. She took in a deep breath and began to poke the needles onto Alfred's body. After the first needle was placed, an exclamation rang out. "What are you doing? How could you stab that acupuncture point?" Frida was the one speaking. While she had a medical background, she wasn't familiar with acupuncture. Despite that, she could tell what Roxanne was doing was very dangerous. It was possible even for normal people to die because of what Roxanne was doing, so the risk was greater for the sickly Alfred. Frida's expression tensed up as rage and panic filled her eyes. "If you don't know how to do it, then don't do it. What are you doing? Are you trying to kill my grandfather?" When she finished speaking, she violently pushed Roxanne away. Roxanne heard her doubts, but she ignored them as she planned where to place the second needle. That was why she didn't expect Frida would suddenly push her. Before Roxanne could react to the situation, Lucian supported her by the waist and stabilized her body. When she raised her head, she saw his dark eyes. As their gazes met, Roxanne's body stiffened. Then she quickly looked away before standing back up by propping her hand on the bed and supporting herself. He had grabbed her subconsciously when she fell. However, when he saw her avoiding him like the plague, the look in his eyes darkened. And so, he quickly withdrew the hand from her waist. "How dare you say you researched complicated diseases before? Is this the result of your research? I think those credentials of yours were bought." Frida didn't notice what was going on between the two of them and was still angry at Roxanne. She stared at Jonathan furiously. "I think she's a liar, Jonathan. We need to kick her out right now." When Roxanne heard that, she quickly snapped back to her senses and mocked, "No wonder old Mr. Queen's condition became so severe. It seems like someone's been interfering with his treatment. Since you insist I'm wrong, I'm leaving right now." She then started to put the needles back into her bag. No one expected she would back off so easily after she displayed a steeled determination to treat Alfred earlier. Jonathan was stunned for a few seconds before snapping out of his daze and apologizing, "I'm really sorry, Dr. Jarvis. To be honest, our family consists of many doctors, so we know a little bit about acupuncture. My sister is angry probably because she thinks it's dangerous for you to jab a needle at that acupuncture point and is worried about our grandpa. Please forgive her." Roxanne ignored him and continued to pack her things. "I don't need to stay here and get scolded by someone who doesn't know what I'm doing. I came here because I genuinely wanted to help old Mr. Queen, but since Ms. Queen doesn't believe me, forget about it." She was caught off guard being pushed like that, and so she lost her center of gravity for a moment. It almost caused her to fall to her side and into Lucian's arms. The moment she finished speaking, she picked up her medical kit and headed to the door. In a panic, Jonathan carefully put Alfred down before chasing after her. "We can talk things out, Dr. Jarvis. My sister did go too far with her words, so I'll ask her to apologize to you right now. Please continue your treatment on my grandfather. There's no need for that. I can't accept Ms. Queen's apology." Roxanne's tone was cold. Lucian's eyebrows were furrowed tightly as he stood at the side of the bed, tearing at the back of her figure with a heavy expression. He could tell she was really angry. On the side, Estella was also able to tell Roxanne was angry. Panic filled her eyes. "I didn't even get the chance to say hello to Ms. Jarvis yet, but now she's leaving because she got angry." Thinking of that, Estella got angry as well. To express her fury, she walked over to Frida, wrote a word in her notebook, and then showed it to Frida. Many people's attention was shifted to her sudden appearance and the word written in her book, which was apologize. Estella stared at Frida with wide eyes. Frida was too embarrassed to back down then. Her line of sight casually shifted away from the notebook, and she pretended to not see Estella. Then she turned to her brother. "If it doesn't work out, we can just find another doctor. I really can't trust this person." When she saw how Frida was still acting stubbornly, Roxanne's expression turned colder as she mocked, "Then I hope you can find a doctor you like before old Mr. Queen takes his last breath, Ms. Queen." She turned around and stepped out. The moment she did that, however, someone grabbed her wrist. Her eyebrows furrowed as she turned back unhappily to see who it was. Lucian's expressionless, handsome face appeared in front of her. Shock filled her heart. What is he? What is the meaning of this? Lucian glanced at Roxanne and turned her around by pulling her wrist. Then he stared at Frida coldly. "Apologize." Frida was flabbergasted when she heard that. What did you say, Lucian?" Lucian looked at her loftily, radiating an intimidating aura. "Old Mr. Queen's condition is extremely severe right now. If there anyone could save him, that person would have shown up by now since you'd invited every famous doctor from inside and outside of the country. But no, that person has never shown up." Stunned by his fierce aura, Frida lowered her head in a panic. "This," Lucian paused, glanced at Roxanne, and continued, "Ms. Jarvis has no relation to the Queen family. She's only here to treat old Mr. Queen. It's fine if you don't believe her, but there's no reason for you to hurt her. Did the Queen family teach you manners like this? Apologize to her now." Jonathan was a little shocked too as he stared at Lucian in disbelief. I can't believe it. Lucian is defending a stranger he doesn't know? He's not wrong, though. After all, Frida had been trying to chase Dr. Jarvis away and even hit her. Why is she acting so rashly today? Since Lucian had lectured Frida, Jonathan also added, Lucian's right, Frida. Apologize to Dr. Jarvis immediately. As worried as you may be, you shouldn't have treated her like that. You're too rash. Frida gritted her teeth and stared at everyone. Lucian's protecting that woman behind him and making me apologize. Not only that, my brother's defending her, too. Even Essie is demanding I apologize. There's no other way out for me. She hesitated for a long while before lowering her head unwillingly. I'm sorry, Dr. Jarvis. I was acting too rashly. My apologies. I shouldn't have hit you. Her tone was very rigid and insincere. Roxanne didn't want to care about what was going on, but at the same time, she was staring at Lucian absent-mindedly. What is he thinking? Why is he helping me again? Before I started the treatment, he was the one who was trying to stop me from advancing. But when I was treating old Mr. Queen, he helped out, and now he's even defending me. His intentions are so unclear. Frida has admitted her mistake, but I don't expect you to forgive her that quickly, Dr. Jarvis. However, as you said, my grandpa's condition is worsening. Can you please treat him first? We can discuss how we can make up for my sister's misdeed in the future. Jonathan's voice rang in her ears. Roxanne was still pretty upset, but when she thought about the research institute, she suppressed her displeasure. Besides, Jonathan was right. Alfred did need a doctor quickly, and he was innocent. With no one disturbing her, Roxanne's treatment went much more smoothly. After a while, a dozen of silver needles were poked onto Alfred's chest. Throughout the entire process, Roxanne focused all her attention on treating him calmly and steadily. In fact, she was so focused that she didn't realize Lucian was staring at her the whole time. When they were downstairs, he had already read through her credentials. It was absolutely flawless. That was enough for him to imagine how exciting her life had been for the past 6 years. However, it was his first time seeing this side of her. Hence she was doing her job. She was absolutely focused and didn't reflect any hesitation in her movements. Tea was something Lucian had never seen in Roxanne before. An indescribable feeling surfaced in his heart when he saw that. At the side, Jonathan had been observing her poking the needles on his grandfather and her expression as she was doing so. After a dozen needles were poked onto Alfred's body, he joyously found out that perhaps she would be able to save Alfred. Like everyone else, he thought it was ridiculous when she stabbed her first silver needle. However, recalling her expression as she was doing so, he somehow felt as though he could trust her. So, he insisted that she stayed. The more he watched her administer the needles skillfully and composedly, the more he was certain she was capable of treating his grandfather. He also noticed that the spots she stabbed with the needles were very dangerous acupuncture points. When she thought about that, she calmed down and swept her gaze past the crowd in the room before ordering coldly, "I hope unrelated persons will leave this room before I restart my treatment." Frida was about to say she was family before Roxanne added, "That include ESMS. Queen." Frida's expression darkened, but Jonathan agreed and asked everyone else to leave. The only people left were Jonathan, Lucian, and a clingy Estella. Roxanne sat next to the bed and prepared her treatment. If she made even the tiniest mistake, not only would her effort be for nothing, but Alfred might also lose his life. It was his belief that Roxanne wouldn't risk Alfred's life unless she was confident. It looks like her research on acupuncture and acupuncture points had indeed reached the level of a master's. Thinking of that, Jonathan felt joyful and respected her from the bottom of his heart. Even though she looks younger than me, she's already much more capable than I am. Indeed, one shouldn't judge a book by its cover. The room remained silent for nearly 20 minutes before Roxanne stabbed one last needle onto Alfred. Her expression relaxed as she lifted her sweaty forehead. "All right, that will be enough. He'll be much better after I remove the needles an hour later." She glanced at the two men beside the bed. Jonathan let out a long sigh of relief and carefully approached Alfred. Then he asked, "When will he wake up?" "He should wake up when I remove the needles." Roxanne stood up and attempted to grab tissue papers to wipe her forehead. Just as she was about to do that, someone tugged the hem of her shirt. She paused and lowered her head in confusion. That was when she met up with Estella's sparkling eyes. Even though she knew it was a child Lucian had with another woman, she still couldn't steal her heart in front of such an angelic and cute face. Seeing how she was looking at her, Estella pulled out a neatly folded handkerchief and stood on her toes. Then she handed the handkerchief to Roxanne with anticipation in her eyes. Roxanne hesitated for a few seconds before smiling, "Thank you." Then she accepted the handkerchief and wiped her forehead with it. Estella smiled brightly and left to pour her a cup of water. Lucian stared silently at how Estella was walking around excitedly. His eyes turned dark. This is the first time she's taking the initiative to get closer to someone. Although, I suppose it's only natural, considering their relationship. Jonathan didn't know that, so he was surprised. "Looks like Essie likes you, Dr. Jarvis." "It's my first time seeing her being willing to get close to another person." Roxanne was slightly stunned before she turned to Lucian with a worried expression. She hadn't been honest with him the incident when Estella was lost back then. "I doubt I can hide it from him, though, and so," she hesitantly explained, "it's probably because I found her when she got lost last time." Jonathan didn't know that happened. His line of sight shifted between Estella and Roxanne. "I guess you two are destined to meet each other, then." Destined? Roxanne thought about Estella's identity and pursed her lips self-deprecatingly before replying plainly, "I suppose so." Jonathan didn't notice anything strange about her, so he stood up and suggested, "Since my grandpa still needs an hour, we should wait downstairs and drink some water." "Thanks for your help, Dr. Jarvis." Roxanne secretly sighed with relief when he changed the topic and quickly agreed to his suggestion. Lucian walked away from his side of the bed, responding to the invitation through his actions. When he tried to hug Estella, the girl wasn't at all interested. After Estella handed the handkerchief to Roxanne, she had been staying at the latter's side. Upon hearing that they were heading downstairs, she immediately reached her hand out and grabbed hand-touched Roxanne's. A phone rang. Roxanne promptly turned around to take the phone in her bag, and her fingertips brushed past the little girl's. It wasn't easy for Estella to build up the courage to hold Roxanne's hand, yet she failed at the last second. She blinked slowly as disappointment colored her expression, and she started fiddling with her fingers. Lucian saw how they almost held each other's hand. His eyes darkened in response. Roxanne picked up the phone and saw it was a call from Madeline. She handed her kids to Madeline tonight because of her appointment at the Queen residence. So, when she saw the call, she thought something happened to the children and speedily answered. As her finger swiped across the screen, she accidentally pressed the speaker icon. "Hello." Roxanne spoke without noticing her mistake. In the next second, she heard two cute voices ringing through the air. "When are you coming back, Mommy?" It shocked her and she quickly turned off the speaker mode. The children's voices vanished in an instant. Despite that, she could feel her heart beating like crazy. She worriedly and subconsciously shot a side glance at Lucian. Her first reaction was that she was afraid he would learn of her children's existence. Lucian's face was currently as dark as the sky before a thunderstorm. There was an icy look in his eyes. "I heard the voices coming from the phone." It was a boy's voice calling her Mommy. Did she get married again? When he realized that, rage flooded into his mind and heart. He gritted his teeth and forced himself to calm down. That was the only way he could resist the urge to pin her to the wall and question her. Jonathan didn't detect anything wrong between the both of them and smiled. "Are you married, Dr. Jarvis?" Roxanne's mind was in so much chaos that she just nodded. When Jonathan saw that, he smiled. "I couldn't tell you already have kids." She apologized. "I'm sorry. Please excuse me while I take a call." When Roxanne walked out of the room, she lowered her voice and spoke to the children. "I'm still treating a patient right now, so I'll be back much later. Go play with Aunt Madeline first." The children were used to her returning home late, so they agreed. Concurrently, inside the room, Lucian's expression was so cold that it was reaching the freezing point. Rage was boiling in his heart. Estella's attempt to reach Roxanne's hand and the mommy he heard on the phone kept echoing in his mind. No wonder she acts so coldly toward Estella. It turns out she had already married someone else and given birth to new children. That's why she abandoned Estella back then. He stared at his daughter, who was still standing in her original spot. Despite her obvious disappointment, she still stared at the door, waiting for Roxanne to return. Watching her like that made his heart ache. So what if she has returned? She still doesn't want to take care of her child. The look on Lucian's face was terrifyingly dark as he approached Estella and carried her into his arms. The girl stared at him with confusion and tugged his collar, indicating that she didn't want to be carried. Of course, he didn't notice it as he coldly announced. "It's getting late, so I'll be taking Essie back home now. If old Mr. Queen wakes up, give me a call. I'll stop by another day." Before Jonathan could reply, he left with Estella. Roxanne had just ended her call and was about to head back in. When she arrived at the doorway, she saw Lucian walking out expressionlessly. Her heart clenched, but just as she wondered what to do, he walked past her and left without glancing at her. She was a little stunned at his sudden departure, though when she returned to her senses, she laughed self-deprecatingly in her mind. It seems like he didn't care about the call at all. 6 years ago, he didn't care about me either, not to mention I did that sort of thing to him when I left. Of course, he won't care about me now, nor would he care about the 2 children. To him, we're all strangers. Roxanne knew they lived in different worlds. She thought about the emotional roller coaster she had just gone through earlier and felt like a joke. She stood outside the door for a long while before sighing gently. Upon tidying up her thoughts, she entered the room. Only Jonathan was left in the room. He had witnessed their interaction earlier. For some reason, I feel like their relationship isn't as simple as it seems. Lucian, especially, seems weird. It's the first time he showed so many emotions toward a woman. He was really curious about their history, but because it was their private matter, he didn't inquire further about it. Instead, he started talking about Alfred's condition with her. Estella was panicking as Lucian brought her out of the mansion and into the car. She quickly wrote a sentence in her notebook and tugged the hem of his shirt before showing it to him. The sentence read, "I haven't talked to Ms. Jarvis yet. Can we stay a little longer?" Seeing that, Lucian felt a surge of mixed feelings, and his eyebrows furrowed. Lucian's expression turned grim when he saw what happened. What's there to talk to her about? Pretend that you don't know her the next time you see her and don't ever interact with her again. Since she has no intention of acknowledging her daughter, I might as well go along with her wishes. Taken aback by Lucian's tone, Estella was briefly stunned before she pouted and wrote in her notebook, "Why?" Before he could reply, she quickly wrote, "I like her very much, and she is kind and gentle to me. I want to be together with her." Despite Lucian's sympathy for her when he saw how much she liked Roxanne, they had no choice but to face reality. He replied indifferently, "That's because she has children of her own and doesn't need another child." Estella was confused by his reply. "I know that the 2 boys are her sons, but she has still been very nice to me. However, Daddy seems to hate her." Estella couldn't help but feel disappointed. When he saw her fall silent, Lucian instructed his assistant to drive. After leaving the Queen residence, he felt a tug on his sleeve, causing him to look over at Estella with knitted brows. She wrote, "In that case, where is my mommy?" She gave him a pitiful look, while her eyes were filled with confusion. "As the pretty lady is the boy's mommy, I cannot be with her." "In that case, where's my mommy?" Her question tore into Lucian's heart. Recovering his gaze painfully, he had no idea how to respond to her. "She's asking me where her mommy is, and I do know the answer. However, how am I going to explain the cruel truth to her? That woman has a new family now." Even with her own daughter standing right before her eyes, she had no intention of acknowledging her. The more he thought about it, the gloomier he became. Consequently, a long silence was his only response to her. Estella noticed her father looked kind of down, and a caring look appeared in her eyes. She then wrote 2 more sentences, "What's wrong, Daddy? Why aren't you happy?" When she didn't obtain an answer, Estella continued to stare blankly at him, yearning for an answer. Finally, Lucian replied through gritted teeth, "I don't know. I don't know where she is, and don't ever ask me this question again. Just having me is enough. There's no need for you to have a mommy at all." After looking at him in shock, Estella gradually put her notebook away before hanging her head in silence. For the rest of the journey home, neither father nor daughter spoke another word. Back at the Queen residence, Roxanne felt out of sorts after Lucian was gone. Jonathan could sense that she was unsettled but didn't bring it up. Instead, he led her downstairs where they made idle chatter over coffee. From the outside, both of them seemed to be getting along very well. After Frida was chased out, she returned to her room. Subsequently, she came out to see for herself what the situation was. When she saw her elder brother sitting with Roxanne on the couch, she let out an inaudible snort. From the very beginning, she never believed in Roxanne's capability, and her opinion of the latter hadn't changed. Despite noticing Frida's contemptuous expression, Roxanne didn't hold it against her and just pretended to be oblivious of the former. 1 hour later, Roxanne changed the subject. "It's time. We can remove the needles now." She got up and headed upstairs with Jonathan following closely behind. At the same time, Frida, too, got up skeptically and went along with them. Even though she didn't have faith in Roxanne, she was still concerned about her grandfather. Furthermore, she intended to see for herself whether Roxanne was as capable as she claimed to be. Compared to inserting needles, removing them was a lot easier. All the needles on Alfred's body were cleared in less than 10 minutes. After checking his condition, Roxanne began to pack her things. In the meantime, Jonathan and Frida stood anxiously by the bedside. Previously, all the famous doctors they had sought failed to produce any results. Therefore, they weren't sure if Alfred was able to wake up this time. Under their attentive gaze, Alfred's fingers began to curl slightly. In the next second, his eyes gradually opened, and he began to grimace while coughing weakly. "Grandpa!" As Jonathan sat down to help Alfred regain his breath, the former's eyes were filled with both shock and delight. Frida, too, was so stunned that she was at a loss for words. Despite her lack of faith in Roxanne, her grandfather had woken up due to Roxanne's treatment. "Grandpa, how do you feel?" Jonathan asked with concern once Alfred had stopped coughing. Alfred nodded slightly and replied in an extremely hoarse voice, "How long have I been asleep for?" Just when Jonathan was about to answer, Roxanne walked over after she was done packing. "It would be better if old Mr. Queen doesn't speak too much now, for he needs a lot more rest." Nodding in response, Jonathan carefully helped Alfred lay back down. After that, he got to his feet and expressed his gratitude. "Dr. Jarvis, I couldn't thank you enough. Also, I would like to apologize for our ignorance over doubting you previously. The mistake was ours, as you're clearly an extraordinary doctor." After accepting his gratitude and apology, Roxanne reminded, "Even though old Mr. Queen has woken up, his prognosis still looks bleak. He needs at least 6 to 7 more treatments before he can truly turn the corner." Jonathan nodded repeatedly. "Also, I'll prescribe some medicine for him to supplement his health, as it will help with the treatment. After all, the damage that old Mr. Queen's body has suffered is significant. As future treatments require him to be strong enough, I'm worried that he might not be able to withstand it," Roxanne continued. Jonathan naturally had no objections as he nodded in agreement. "Don't worry. We will comply with all your instructions regarding Grandpa's treatment." Nodding slightly, Roxanne retrieved a bottle of pills from her bag. Here, take 2 pills 3 times a day after meals." Subsequently, she took out a piece of paper and wrote a prescription for him. "Based on the quantity I've written here, get 10 batches of them. Every day, add them into a soup for old Mr. Queen to drink. This way, it will hasten his recovery." Jonathan acknowledged, "All right. We'll follow your instructions." After going into the details a little more, Roxanne realized it was getting late when she checked the time. Thinking of her 2 sons waiting for her at home, she got up to leave. "I think it's time for me to go, but I'll be coming back tomorrow. In the meantime, call me if old Mr. Queen has any problems." With that, she headed to the door with her medical bag in hand. Glancing at Roxanne's leaving silhouette, Jonathan called out to her, "Dr. Jarvis, other than treating Grandpa, I'm sure you have some other reason for being here." Stopping abruptly in her tracks, Roxanne suddenly remembered her objective for coming over. "But old Mr. Queen hasn't recovered fully yet. So, Jonathan." When Jonathan saw her stop, he softened his tone. "Don't you want to talk about it first before leaving?" Jonathan's intentions couldn't be more obvious. Even though she didn't bring up the matter of medicine supply, he was cognizant of her agenda. In fact, he was also interested in exploring the matter with her. However, Roxanne hesitated at being rewarded for a task she had yet to complete. After all, the Queen family had initially declared that they would only supply medicine at half price to whoever that cured Alfred. When she didn't say a word, Jonathan simply stared at her with a grin. Roxanne smiled back. "To be honest, I did come here to treat old Mr. Queen after a friend told me that your family was willing to sell medicine at half price to whoever cured him. But now that he has only just awakened and his condition hasn't stabilized, I don't think it's appropriate to talk about the reward. At the very least, we can wait till his situation makes a turn for the better." Jonathan's smile broadened upon hearing Roxanne's answer. He then replied with even greater sincerity. "Dr. Jarvis, the fact that Grandpa is awake is already a miracle to us. As for his follow-up treatment, we have the utmost confidence in you. Consequently, you have earned the right for us to discuss your reward." Surprised at how much faith he had in her, Roxanne was briefly stunned. When she finally regained her senses, she took a seat on the couch. "You were recommended by Dr. Galloway. When he came to see Grandpa back then, he did bring up the situation at the Research Institute. However, since he was unable to help Grandpa, the matter ended up in limbo." Jonathan explained further, "How that he has sent you here, I'm sure it has something to do with the Research Institute. Is my guess spot on?" Roxanne nodded slightly before relating the Research Institute's situation to him. "The Research Institute is currently working on a few projects. Unfortunately, progress is being held back by the lack of medicines. As a result, we've been searching for a medicine supplier whom we can work with. Unfortunately, we ended up being rejected by everyone in Horrington. With no other choice, Colby thought of the Queen family and figured that I should give it a try." Looking at Jonathan, Roxanne explained earnestly, "Of course, even without the reward, I would still do my best to treat old Mr. Queen. The reward is nothing more than a bonus to me." When Roxanne's serious expression earned Jonathan's further respect, he repeated, "I would like to apologize again for the doubt I've shown you earlier. You truly are an exceptional doctor." Acknowledging his praise, Roxanne stared intently at Jonathan while waiting for him to discuss the medicine supply. With no time to waste, Jonathan jumped right into it after gaining an understanding of the situation. "Now that Grandpa has awoken after receiving your treatment, we hope that you will continue taking good care of him. As for the reward promised by our family, I have the authority to make a decision. As a start, I will provide the Research Institute with its first batch of medicine free of charge as a sign of our gratitude. Subsequently, our family will sign a long-term contract." Upon hearing her promise, Jonathan replied with a smile, "Your words have put my mind at ease. Anyway, I'll get the contract drafted tomorrow. When the time comes, all you need to do is sign it." Roxanne nodded in acknowledgement. With the matter of the reward settled, Jonathan personally escorted her to the door and watched her drive away. Only when her car disappeared from sight did he return to the house and give Lucian a call. "How is old Mr. Queen?" The moment the call connected, Lucian's voice rang out with the sound of water flowing in the background. Jonathan answered with a grin, "He's already awake. Dr. Jarvis is amazing." Recalling how awkward Lucian and Roxanne behaved earlier, he asked curiously, "Lucian, are you acquainted with Dr. Jarvis prior to this? I just feel as if something is amiss between both of you. Furthermore, I've never seen you behave that way with another woman before." Even though he made things difficult for her, he stood up for her at the same time. In the beginning, Jonathan really thought that Lucian didn't take Roxanne seriously. However, after watching Lucian help her and even insisting that Frida apologize to her, he had no idea what to think. His hunch told him that both of them knew each other, but it was impossible for him to guess what sort of relationship they had. Lucian's concern for Alfred was the only reason why he took Jonathan's call. Hence, the question caused his expression to darken. With the institute to supply medicine at half price, Roxanne gradually understood the situation. After watching Alfred regain consciousness from her treatment, Jonathan was thoroughly convinced that she could cure him. As for the first batch of free medicine, it was both a gift and also an effort to reassure her. After all, that batch would solve the urgent shortage at the Research Institute, allowing her to concentrate on curing Alfred without any distractions. Needless to say, Jonathan's proposal was extremely tempting. "All right. Please rest assured that I will do my best to cure old Mr. Queen. I don't know her. If I did, I would already have gotten her to treat old Mr. Queen." Before Jonathan could reply, Lucian hung up, triggering the former's curiosity. Somehow, Lucian's tone just now was really awkward. Do they really not know one another? By the time Roxanne reached home, it was already late at night. Madeline was playing Search Lego with the boys in the living room. The moment the three of them saw Roxanne, they dropped the Search Lego in their hands and welcomed her home together. "Mommy!" The two boys threw themselves into her arms and asked in a concerned tone, "Why did you come back so late? All of us are already sleepy." Both of them yawned with their eyes about to close. Roxanne tousled their hair. "I'm sorry for letting all of you wait that long." Raising her gaze, she wanted to thank Madeline. Sensing what she was about to say, Madeline waved her hands. "Don't worry about it. Both of them are my godsons after all. As for you, have you had your dinner yet? It's already so late." Roxanne shook her head. I didn't manage to eat, as I was caught up with work. She had lost track of time while treating Alfred and discussing the supply of medicine with Jonathan. However, now that Roxanne had reminded her of it, she began to feel her stomach growling. Madeline gave her an annoyed look. I knew this would happen whenever you're busy. Therefore, I set aside a portion of dinner. You should quickly have some. The boys, too, urged her to eat as they herded her to the dining table. Warmed by their gesture, Roxanne took a few bites while Madeline and the kids stayed by her side. When she saw that Roxanne was almost done with her food, Madeline inquired, considering how late you came back today, is the patient's condition serious? How is the progress? Roxanne nodded with a smile. It is. Nonetheless, I'm confident of curing him still. On top of that, I'll also be able to solve the supply issue at the research institute. With that thought in mind, Roxanne's mood improved dramatically. Madeline, too, had just as much faith. Since you're confident in doing so, I trust that you'll definitely be able to cure him. After some idle chatter, Madeline took her leave as it was already late. In the meantime, the boys followed Roxanne around. After tidying up the room for a bit, she finally had time for them. Did you enjoy yourselves at kindergarten today? Did you get into fights with your friends? After recalling the events of the day, the boys responded with a forceful nod. We had a good time. When school was over, they even gave us a lot of snacks. Roxanne couldn't help but smile. It seems both of you are really popular. Benny nodded earnestly before glancing in Archie's direction. In fact, there's a girl today who declared that she wants to marry Archie when she grows up. Really? Roxanne gave her son an amused look. Briefly stunned, Archie threw his brother a glance before blushing all the way to his ears. Yes, but I didn't agree to it. Pinching his ear, Benny made a face at Archie. When she saw how the boys were fooling around, Roxanne beamed with satisfaction. Even though it was already late, the boys clung to her and related to her everything that happened in kindergarten. Most of the time, Benny would have a whole lot to say while Archie would summarize his words. As for Roxanne, she would listen intently and let out the occasional laugh when she saw how cute they were. When she finally checked the time, it was almost 10. Time for bed. You still have school tomorrow. She coaxed the children, putting on a serious expression. Complying obediently, both of them went upstairs to sleep. The next morning, Roxanne dropped them off at the kindergarten before heading to the research institute. Once the morning meeting was over, she came out of the conference room together with Colby. How did it go yesterday? Did you manage to treat old Mr. Queen's sickness? Colby inquired. Roxanne nodded slightly. Although his condition appears to be serious and complex treatment is needed, it's still possible to cure him, but it will take quite a bit of time. As I'll be going over often the next few days, you'll have to hold the fort around here for the time being. Filled with admiration, Colby teased, I'm amazed you're able to treat a sickness that has baffled all the famous doctors sought out by the Queen family. Dr. Jarvis, your words make us feel ashamed of ourselves. Even though he was joking, there was truth to his words. After all, he was one of the doctors who was also stumped by Alfred's condition. Roxanne downplayed the matter with a smile. It just happens to fall into my area of specialty." When he saw the nonchalant look on her face, Colby's heart throbbed. "By the way, even though old Mr. Queen hasn't fully recovered, the Queen family has agreed to supply us with the medicine, and we'll likely be able to sign the contract today. In fact, the first batch is provided free of charge. This not only solves our urgent shortage, but we will also not have to worry about supply anymore." Roxanne's face lit up at the thought of having secured the supply of medicine. Colby cocked his brow in surprise. "Really? The Queen family are actually willing to sign a contract with us even though old Mr. Queen has just regained consciousness?" Roxanne nodded with a grin. Upon her confirmation, Colby praised, "It's clear that they have been blown away by your medical skills. You truly are amazing." Roxanne chuckled casually. "I'm just doing what I can. Hopefully, there will not be any untoward developments when it comes to old Mr. Queen's condition. With you running the show, I'm sure everything will be fine," Colby answered with conviction. Cognizant that Madeline had helped her pick up the boys 2 days in a row, Roxanne planned to pick them up herself that day. Thus, she headed to the Queen residence in the afternoon after finishing her work in the morning. After she arrived, she examined Alfred to make sure there weren't any complications before continuing his treatment by inserting needles. While waiting for the time to remove the needles, Jonathan approached with a document in hand. "Dr. Jarvis, here's the contract I've prepared. If you're fine with the terms, you can just sign on it." Roxanne wasn't surprised, as that was what they discussed the night before. After going through the document in detail, she placed her signature at the bottom. With the contract signed, Jonathan's attitude toward her grew warmer. "From now on, we have become partners. Nevertheless, we'll still need your help with regards to Grandpa's condition." Roxanne nodded in acknowledgement. "That's the least I can do." After a brief chat, Roxanne looked at the time and extracted the needles from Alfred's body. Even though she had tried her best to rush, school had already ended for the boys by the time she finished packing. Taking her leave quickly, Roxanne drove to pick them up. Along the way, she wondered if they would be worried since she didn't inform them that she would be late. By the time she arrived, all the students were gone, leaving behind an empty kindergarten. Upon scanning the surroundings, Roxanne saw the 2 boys sitting on a small bench in the field, but there was no sign of any teachers at all. As a result, she hurried up to them anxiously. "Mommy!" The boys ran in her direction the instant they saw her. Hugging them, she knelt down to stroke their faces. "I'm sorry. I was busy and lost track of time." Archie gave her an understanding shake of his head. "It's all right. We're safe in the kindergarten. Plus, there's a teacher here with us. There's no need for you to be worried." Benny, too, gave a corresponding nod. Roxanne gave them a confused look. "A teacher?" Archie pointed at the corner of the field. Trailing the trajectory of his finger, Roxanne saw a teacher by the slide. With a warm smile on her face, she was kneeling on the ground while speaking to a little girl. Looking adorable in her kindergarten uniform, the girl had her hands tensely placed on her knees while sitting in an upright position. At the same time, she was staring intently in their direction. The moment she recognized the girl, Roxanne was stunned. If memory serves me right, that's clearly Lucian's daughter. Is she studying here too? Initially, Estella was just watching Archie and Benny. However, the moment she saw Roxanne, her eyes lit up. Realizing that Roxanne was looking at her, her lips curled up in delight as she attempted to greet the former. But the very next second, Roxanne looked away, causing Estella's smile to fade as she gave them a dejected stare. She obviously recognizes me but chooses to ignore me. Mommy, what's wrong? Are you tired from work? Archie shook Roxanne's hand when he noticed her looking distracted. Regaining her senses, Roxanne replied with a grin, "Not at all." With that, Benny happily grabbed her hands and exclaimed, "In that case, let's go home." Roxanne gave him a non-committal nod, before leading the boys over to greet the teacher. Just before she left, her gaze subconsciously fell upon Estella again. When she saw that the three of them were about to go, Estella stood up anxiously while staring intently at them. Worried that she would fall, the teacher quickly held onto her. After a brief hesitation, Roxanne couldn't help inquiring out of concern. Is she well aware of what she was about to ask? The boys answered right away, "Mommy, she's a student here too. In fact, she's in the same class as we are. Since her daddy and mommy have yet to pick her up, she was waiting together with us." Naughty ng in acknowledgement, Roxanne's heart melted slightly at the sight of Estella. Nevertheless, she didn't intend to stay, for it will either be Lucian or Aubrey who would be picking Estella up soon. Neither of whom she had any intention of seeing again. However, Estella was visibly reluctant to see her go. Not wanting to disappoint her, Roxanne stroked Estella's head with a smile. "Your parents will be here soon. As I need to go first, you must obey the teacher and wait together with her, all right?" Just as Roxanne was about to leave, Estella grabbed her sleeve tightly. Halted by Estella's reaction, Roxanne lowered her gaze and saw the former shaking her head with slightly reddened eyes. The look on Estella's face caused Roxanne to feel so heavy-hearted that she couldn't bring herself to move. When the teacher saw Estella refusing to let Roxanne leave, she sighed in resignation before approaching the latter to explain, "Estella has recently been very close to Archie and Benny. Due to her autistic character, very few students are willing to play with her. But the very first day the brothers came to class, they ended up protecting her. That's why she has grown to rely on both of them. And now, she's probably scared that they're leaving." After hearing about Estella's situation, Roxanne could feel the discomfort within her intensify. Not only is the little girl mute, but she's also autistic. No wonder the teacher let the boys wait by the side. Unfortunately, the thought of running into Lucian and Aubrey caused Roxanne to feel hesitant about staying behind. Despite the teacher's coaxing, Estella refused to let Roxanne go no matter what. "I remember that you came back from overseas together with Archie and Benny. Considering that they grew up overseas, I'm surprised at how well they speak Chilean." Since the chat was just an excuse, the teacher talked about trivial matters, as Archie and Benny's performances in class were so impressive that there was nothing to complain about. Roxanne nodded with a smile. That's because there were still many Chanaeans around to converse with them. Meanwhile, the boys didn't say a word and merely smiled obediently. They would simply nod at whatever their mother said. Seeing how well behaved they were, the teacher couldn't help but gush in admiration. Other than Chilean and Austronesian, they seem to be able to speak fair opinion too, don't they? They probably picked it up from my colleagues overseas. Roxanne caressed the boy's hair. Impressed, the teacher exclaimed, I must say, they are exceptionally smart to not only have mastered 3 languages at such a young age but also the elementary school curriculum too. Coupled with their exquisite features, you really do have exceptional children. After a while, the teacher appealed, Ms. Jarvis, are you rushing for time? If not, shall we chat a little? Ever since Archie and Benny came to school, I have yet to speak to you about their progress. It was clear to Roxanne that the teacher was just getting her to wait with Estella under the pretext of discussing the boy's performance in school. At the same time, Estella, too, threw her a hopeful gaze. Faced with the look in Estella's eyes, Roxanne, who was about to decline, couldn't bring herself to say it. In the end, she swallowed her words and nodded at the teacher. In response, Estella's eyes glistened as she discreetly leaned into Roxanne while holding the latter's sleeve. From afar, it looked as if she was leaning in Roxanne's arms. Roxanne beamed with pride at the praise. You flatter us. They're just ordinary children who enjoy learning. While they were chatting, Roxanne continued to be vigilant about whether someone was coming to pick Estella up. Upon checking the time, she realized that a long while had passed. Filled with sudden concern, she asked, by the way, when will the girls' parents arrive? The teacher looked at her watch and answered, probably soon. After nodding in response, Roxanne lowered her gaze at Estella. The latter was still standing beside her while maintaining her grip on Roxanne's sleeve as if she was fearful of Roxanne leaving. Resigning herself to the fact that she couldn't leave, Roxanne turned to the boys. Can you boys go to the car first and wait for me there? Nodding obediently, both of them walked to the kindergarten's entrance. Once she saw them get into the car, Roxanne recovered her gaze. It was prudent to keep the boys out of the way since she couldn't avoid meeting those two. At the kindergarten entrance, Archie and Benny got into the car one after another before looking out the window. Why do you think Mommy asked us to come out here? Benny wondered while holding his chin. Archie put their school bags away before joining his brother at the window. Because Daddy is about to arrive. For some strange reason, Mommy doesn't want us to meet Daddy. However, she isn't aware that we have discovered Daddy's true identity and even know what he looks like. As the boys continued to stare outside, a Rolls-Royce dramatically pulled up by the street. A towering man in a long-sleeved shirt and pants alighted from it. Ever since the car appeared, Benny monitored it closely. When the man came out of the car, he locked his gaze on the man and gave Archie a nudge. Archie, look! Can that be Daddy? After turning his head to glance at the man, Archie nodded with conviction. Without a doubt, that's the man I saw on the internet. Upon receiving Archie's confirmation, Benny couldn't help but praise aloud, Daddy looks a lot more dashing in real life compared to the picture. Just as he spoke, Archie shot him a glare. Didn't I tell you that you're not allowed to like him? Meanwhile, Lucian didn't notice the boys in the car as he strode into the kindergarten, well aware that he was late. The moment he stepped in, he saw two figures by the slide together with Estella, who had squeezed herself into Roxanne's arms by then. Mr. Farwell, you're here, the teacher greeted respectfully when she saw Lucian. Lucian nodded in acknowledgement as he walked up to them. After throwing his daughter a glance, he stared coldly at Roxanne. "Why are you here?" Sensing his hostility, Roxanne knitted her brows in confusion. The teacher then looked at them in surprise. "Do you know each other?" Just a while ago, she had assumed that Roxanne didn't know Estella. However, considering how dependent Estella was on Roxanne, she figured that it wasn't such a surprise at all. After nodding at the teacher without answering the question, Roxanne shifted her attention toward Lucian. "I came here to pick my boys up. It was your daughter who refused to let go of my clothes, forcing me to stay here with her." The moment he heard the words "your daughter" roll off her tongue, Lucian's expression darkened. How can she say such a thing in front of her own daughter? What a heartless woman! Unaware of what she had said wrong, Roxanne saw a sudden change in Lucian's expression as he turned his attention to Estella. "Come here." Lucian reached out his hand grimly. After glancing at Lucian's outstretched hand, Estella raised her gaze and gave Roxanne a reluctant and pitiful look. "Just when I finally got the chance to be with her, why does Daddy have to be so fierce?" As the seconds ticked by, Lucian's expression turned darker when Estella refused to let go of Roxanne. In the end, Roxanne lowered her gaze and tousled Estella's hair before reassuring her, "Your daddy is here to pick you up, and I have to go too." With a sullen expression, Archie glared at the man outside as if he was their mortal enemy. "This is the man who abandoned Mommy and us." Man who, after being admonished by his brother, Benny zipped his mouth sheepishly. "So, you should go home with him now." After that, Roxanne stood back up, planning to leave the instant Estella released her grip. In spite of that, Estella adamantly refused regardless of how gloomy Lucian looked. Instead, she continued to give Roxanne a pleading look. For some inexplicable reason, she loved staying by Roxanne's side, to the extent of wanting to follow the latter home. As the tension in the air began to build, the teacher felt the need to defuse the situation. Before she could, she saw Lucian making his move all of a sudden. Walking up to Estella, Lucian asserted in an authoritative voice, "Estella Farwell, let go and come home with me." Shaken by his tone, the little girl ended up tightening her grip on Roxanne and leaning closer to her by reflex. As she was already standing by the edge of the slide, she lost her balance while shifting her legs without looking, with her heart skipping a beat. Roxanne managed to stop Estella from falling by reaching out to catch her. Subsequently, Estella refused to let Roxanne go, leaving the latter with no choice but to hug her in case she fell again. Having calmed her down, Roxanne couldn't help but frown. "Lucian, if you're upset with me, you should just vent your frustrations at me instead of the child." Even though Lucian had seen the same event unfold, he didn't manage to get to Estella in time. Therefore, he retorted upon hearing Roxanne's comments, "How is the way I treat my daughter any of your business? Don't think that just because she likes you, it gives you the right to get involved." The tension between them felt as if it could explode at any moment. In response to his mocking tone, Roxanne's expression darkened as an inexplicable sense of anger swelled within her. After Roxanne's anger receded, she realized how funny the situation was. "Indeed, I don't have any rights." In his eyes, "I never had any." She dropped her gaze to the floor, concealing the self-deprecation in them. Without saying anything, she forced herself to remove Estella's grip from her sleeve. Estella's little fingers wanted to reach for her again, but Roxanne grabbed it mid-air. Archie and Benny are still waiting for me in the car. I have to go to them. Be a good girl and go with your dad. Roxanne ruffled Estella's head gently and released the latter's hand. With a hurried farewell to the teacher, Roxanne turned on her heels and rushed out the front door without another glance back. Back in the car, Archie and Benny were sitting upright. When they saw Roxanne getting in the car, they asked innocently, "Mommy, what's wrong?" Roxanne sucked in a deep breath before plastering a forced smile. "Nothing. Let's go home." She started up the car and pulled away from the kindergarten. Meanwhile, Lucian was still rooted in place. Shooting a sharp gaze at the teacher, he asked, "Are her sons attending here too?" The teacher didn't know what went on between the two parents but could sense the tension coming off of Lucian. Feeling the pressure, the teacher answered hesitantly, "Yet. Ms. Jarvis' twins attend our kindergarten." Before the teacher could finish, he interrupted coldly, "When did they start?" "Just a few days ago," the teacher replied carefully. "Inform the head of the kindergarten to remove the boys from the list. If you don't do as I ask, Farwell Group won't be investing in this kindergarten anymore." Lucian's expression turned hostile. Not allowing the teacher the time to digest his words, he carried Estella into his arms and strode to the front door. Upon arriving at the parking lot, Lucian noticed the car parked beside his was already gone. Withdrawing his gaze, he carried Estella into the car without a pause in his step. The minute he got into the car, Estella struggled violently in his arms. Lucian loosened his grip on her, letting her crawl to the other side of the seat. Stella took out her notebook angrily and scribbled something on it with force. A while later, her hand stopped. Estella was furious this time as she turned her notebook around and sat there glaring at Lucian instead of crawling over to him to yank on his sleeve for his attention. Lucian sighed silently and turned his head over to peer at Estella with a frown. The entire length of the paper only had one sentence scribbled across it: "Why are you not letting Archie and Benny come to kindergarten?" Seeing Lucian finally turn his attention to her, Estella angrily shoved the notebook closer to his face. The crease between Lucian's brows deepened at her actions. He withdrew his gaze and said, "No particular reason. I did it because I could and wanted to. That's the answer I can give if you insist on one." Upon finishing his sentence, he heard movement coming from the seat beside him. He turned and saw Estella angrily throw her notebook to the side and clung to the door. She even leaned her head out of the window. Despite not saying anything, her whole body was exuding an "I don't want to look at you" vibe. Lucian arched his brow at her body language. "You getting mad isn't going to change my mind." Estella furiously snapped her head to him and shot him a death glare. "Daddy is the worst. I hate Daddy the most. I like the beautiful Ms. Jarvis and Archie and Benny. Why did Daddy have to fight with her and even forbade Archie and Benny to attend kindergarten?" Estella was crestfallen at the thought of never being able to see Archie and Benny at the kindergarten anymore. "Daddy is too unreasonable. I don't want to like him anymore." Estella sulked the whole way back. She ignored Lucian, who was trailing after her, and dashed up the stairs to her room without one glance back at him. After slamming the door, she even locked the door angrily. Catalina was standing at the door when the father and daughter arrived, so she noticed Estella's angry mood. When she shifted her gaze to the expressionless Lucian walking behind Estella, she knew they were once again at outs with each other. "Mr. Farwell, what is Ms. Estella angry about?" Hearing the loud slamming from the door upstairs, Catalina turned to Lucian with a concerned look. Recalling the reason Estella got mad at him, Lucian answered impassively, "Nothing. She's just throwing a tantrum. Look after her." Catalina nodded habitually, "Yes, sir." I wonder why Ms. Estella would lose her temper with Mr. Farwell when she was rarely expressive. Moreover, Mr. Farwell isn't good at coaxing others. All in all, we need a lady of the house. Estella was only mad at Lucian, so she obediently opened her door when Catalina knocked on it. "Ms. Estella, come and have something to eat." Catalina carried a tray of Estella's favorite food into her room. Alas, Estella didn't have an appetite. After taking 2 bites of the food, she pushed the plate away and sat gloomily by the desk. Catalina's heart ached for the little girl. However, she knew this was something between father and daughter, so she wasn't in any position to give any advice. She took the food back to the kitchen and came back to help Estella shower after a few hours later. After cleaning up the bathroom, Catalina saw Estella lying on her stomach on her bed, staring at the laptop in front of her with a hardened look. She wondered what the little girl was doing tapping on the keyboard so seriously. However, Catalina was used to Estella tapping away on the keyboard, so she silently left the room after cleaning up without asking anything. Meanwhile, Roxanne was stuck in a traffic jam on her way back with Archie and Benny. Archie and Benny silently sat in the back seat, occasionally exchanging glances with each other, all the while studying their mom's expression through the rear-view mirror. They didn't know what happened at the kindergarten earlier. Even though Roxanne didn't tell them anything, They noticed that she was in a bad mood. "Mommy, we made some cards at the kindergarten today. The teacher had us make it for the people we love, so Archie and I made one for you." Benny secretly cast a glance at Archie, hinting at him to cheer their mother up. Archie nodded with understanding. "Mommy, do you want to know what we wrote?" Roxanne knew they were trying to lift her mood, so she nodded with a smile. "Sure. What did you guys write?" Sounds of someone shuffling through the bag came from the back, then Benny's emotional voice read loudly. "The person I love the most is Mommy. My mommy is an amazing doctor. Even though she's always busy with work, my brother and I know she loves us the most. We think Mommy is a great person for saving lives every day. Sometimes, we would feel bad for her and wish she won't get too busy and tire herself out. I hope Mommy will stay beautiful forever." Roxanne couldn't keep her giggle in. "It's so long. It was no wonder your teacher would tell me you guys excelled in Chilean. What about you, Archie?" Archie sat up straight and began reading aloud, "My mommy is an amazing doctor. Saving lives is a difficult job, and so is taking care of my brother and me. I want to be like her when I grow up. I wish I can grow up quickly and earn money for my family, so Mommy doesn't have to be so tired all the time." Roxanne's heart melted into a puddle at their heartfelt confessions. She had thrown out everything that happened at the kindergarten earlier out of her mind. "Thank you, boys. The kids exchanged glances and released a relieved breath simultaneously when they noticed her mood had brightened. Join our Facebook and WhatsApp group for more updates, link is given in description. Rest audiobook will be continued in next episode.